Adopted sister fabricated bank statements to frame me for stealing from our parents' retirement fund, got me disowned and homeless during my final semester of college, then abandoned her 7-year-old daughter with them and disappeared. I need to get this out because people keep telling me I should just move on, but they don't understand what really happened here and how deep this goes. My sister Emma is 3 years older than me and we were both adopted by the same family when I was 8 and she was 11. We grew up together for 10 years and I thought we were close, but I was completely wrong about who she really was. Emma has always been good with computers and technology stuff. She works in some kind of IT job that I never really understood the details of, but she makes decent money and lives in her own apartment about 20 minutes from our parents' house. She has a daughter Lily who is 7 now, really sweet kid who calls me Aunt Sarah even though we're not blood related, and Emma has been struggling as a single mom since Lily's dad took off when she was 2 years old. Our parents are both retired now. Dad worked as a mechanic for 30 years and mom was a school secretary. They saved up a good amount of money for retirement and they've always been really careful with their finances and proud of how much they managed to put away even though they never made huge salaries. They talk about their retirement fund all the time and how it's their security for their old age. They have about $180,000 saved up total between their 401k and some other accounts. I'm in my senior year of college studying nursing. I live in the dorms and work part-time at a coffee shop near campus to pay for my personal expenses while my parents help with tuition and books. I've always been grateful for their support and I work really hard to keep my grades up and stay on track to graduate in May. I've never asked them for extra money beyond what we agreed on for school expenses and I've always been careful not to take advantage of their generosity. 3 months ago Emma started acting really weird around me. She would get snappy when I came home to visit and she seemed stressed about something, but when I asked her what was wrong she would just say she was tired from work and dealing with Lily's school stuff. I noticed she started coming over to our parents' house a lot more often, especially when I wasn't there, and she would always find excuses to use Dad's computer or ask to borrow Mom's laptop to look something up. Emma knows all our parents' passwords and account information because she helps them with their online banking and computer problems. They trust her completely and never thought twice about giving her access to everything. She set up their online accounts years ago and she's the one they call whenever they can't figure out how to check their balances or pay bills electronically, so it was totally normal for her to be on their computer looking at financial stuff. 2 months ago our parents started acting strange around me too. They would stop talking when I walked into a room and Mom kept giving me these weird looks like she was trying to figure something out. Dad started making comments about responsibility and how disappointed he was in young people these days who think they can just take whatever they want, but when I asked him what he meant he would just shake his head and say I should know what I did. I had no idea what they were talking about and it was making me really anxious because I couldn't think of anything I had done wrong. I was keeping up with my classes and my job and I hadn't broken any of their rules or gotten into any trouble. The tension in the house was getting really bad and I started dreading my visits home because everyone seemed angry at me for something I couldn't identify. Emma was acting even weirder during this time. She would barely look at me when we were in the same room and she started making these passive-aggressive comments about people who betray family trust and how some people can't be helped no matter how much support they get. When I tried to ask her directly what was going on she would just say that some things speak for themselves and I would figure it out eventually. I thought maybe she was having problems with money because being a single mom is expensive and she had mentioned a few times that Lily needed new school clothes and her car was making weird noises, but she had never asked our parents for help before so I didn't think that was it. She's always been really independent and proud of taking care of herself and Lily without needing anyone else's money. 3 weeks ago everything exploded and I found out what had been building up all this time. Dad called me at school and told me I needed to come home immediately for a family meeting. His voice was cold and angry in a way I had never heard before and he wouldn't explain what it was about over the phone. I drove home that afternoon with my stomach in knots because I knew something really bad was about to happen but I still had no idea what. When I got to the house Emma was already there sitting at the kitchen table with a bunch of papers spread out in front of her. Our parents were standing behind her looking at me like I was a stranger they didn't want in their house. Dad told me to sit down and then he started talking about how disappointed and betrayed they felt, how they had trusted me and supported me and I had repaid them by stealing from their retirement fund. I was completely confused and told them I had no idea what they were talking about. I had never taken any money from them except for the agreed upon school expenses and I didn't even have access to their bank accounts or retirement funds. That's when Emma pushed the papers across the table to me and said the evidence was right there in black and white, there was no point in denying it anymore. The papers were bank statements from Dad's retirement account showing multiple withdrawals over the past 6 months, all for amounts between $3,000 and $8,000, and they totaled up to exactly $55,000. Next to each withdrawal there were notes in the memo field that said things like Sarah college expenses and Sarah emergency funds and Sarah personal loan, and the dates lined up with times when I had been home visiting or when I had called them about school stuff. I stared at these papers and told them this was impossible because I had never asked for any of this money and I didn't even know how to access their retirement account, but Dad said the evidence was right there and the account required 2 forms of identification to make withdrawals so someone had to have his social security number and driver's license information. Mom started crying and saying she couldn't believe I would steal from them after everything they had done for me. How could I take money from their retirement when they worked so hard to save it? Emma was sitting there nodding along and making comments about how she had suspected something was wrong when she noticed the account balance seemed lower than it should be. That's why she had printed out the statements to double-check the numbers. She said she had been hoping she was wrong, but the evidence was clear and she was sorry she had to be the one to expose what I had been doing. I was getting really angry at this point because I knew I hadn't done any of this, but they were all looking at me like I was some kind of criminal, so I started yelling that someone had obviously faked these statements or hacked into the account because I had never taken any money from them. Dad yelled back that I was making things worse by lying about it when the proof was sitting right in front of me, and Emma said she was disappointed that I wouldn't just admit what I had done and apologize instead of making up crazy stories about hacking. Mom kept asking me how I could do this to them when they had given me a home and paid for my education. They had treated me like their own daughter and I had betrayed them in the worst possible way. She said they had been planning to help me with a down payment on a house after graduation, but now they didn't know if they would have enough money left for their own expenses. I had stolen their security and their future. I was crying and screaming that I didn't do this and someone was setting me up, but they wouldn't listen to anything I said because the bank statements looked completely real and official. Emma kept pointing out specific details like how the amounts matched up with times when I had mentioned needing new textbooks or when my car needed repairs. She said it was too much of a coincidence for someone else to have known about those things. Dad told me I had 1 hour to pack my things and get out of their house. They didn't want a thief living under their roof and they were cutting off all financial support for school immediately. Mom said they needed time to figure out how much damage I had done to their finances and whether they would be able to retire as planned. They couldn't even look at me anymore without feeling sick about what I had done to them. I tried to argue with them and explain that this made no sense because why would I steal money and then put my own name in the memo fields, but Emma said that just proved how arrogant and careless I had been about covering my tracks. She said she was sorry this had all come out, but they deserved to know the truth about what had been happening to their money. I packed my stuff and drove back to school that night. I called them the next day to try to talk about this more calmly, but Dad hung up on me as soon as he heard my voice. I tried calling Mom, but she wouldn't answer her phone. And when I texted Emma asking her to help me figure out what really happened, she wrote back that I needed to stop lying and take responsibility for what I had done. I spent the next week trying to figure out how this could have happened. I called the bank to ask about the withdrawals, but they said they couldn't discuss account details with me since I wasn't an authorized user. I asked if there was any way to investigate whether the statements had been altered, but they said if I suspected fraud I would need to file a police report and they would cooperate with any official investigation. I thought about filing a police report, but I realized that would mean accusing my own family of fraud, and I wasn't sure I was ready to take that step, especially since I didn't have any proof that the statements were fake except for my own knowledge that I hadn't made those withdrawals. I also didn't have money for a lawyer and I was about to lose my financial support for school, so I needed to focus on figuring out how to pay for my final semester. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop and applied for emergency financial aid at school. I explained to the financial aid office that my family had cut off support due to a misunderstanding, but I couldn't give them too many details because I was still hoping we could work things out. I moved out of the dorms and found a cheap room to rent near campus. I was basically living paycheck to paycheck and eating ramen every day, but I was determined to finish my degree. My parents changed their phone numbers and blocked me on social media. When I drove by the house my first week back home, the locks had been changed and there was a note on the door telling me not to come back or they would call the police. I tried reaching out to some of our extended family members, but Emma had already talked to them and told them I had stolen money from our parents, so most of them didn't want to get involved in family drama. I was completely alone and trying to focus on my classes while dealing with this nightmare situation. I kept hoping that somehow the truth would come out and my parents would realize they had made a mistake. I couldn't understand how Emma could sit there and watch them kick me out when she knew I hadn't done anything wrong, unless she actually believed the fake statements were real. 2 weeks after I got kicked out, I heard from my Aunt Linda, who is Mom's sister, that Emma had disappeared and left Lily with our parents. According to Linda, Emma had dropped Lily off for what she said was going to be a weekend visit, but then she never came back to pick her up and she wasn't answering her phone or responding to messages. Our parents tried going to her apartment, but the landlord said she had moved out suddenly and didn't leave a forwarding address. Linda said our parents were panicking because they were suddenly responsible for taking care of a 7-year-old full-time and they didn't know where Emma had gone or when she was coming back. Lily kept asking for her mom and they didn't know what to tell her. They were also worried about Emma's safety since it wasn't like her to just vanish without explaining anything to anyone. I found this timing really suspicious because Emma had just succeeded in getting me kicked out of the family and now she was running away right when our parents needed support dealing with the aftermath. But I couldn't talk to anyone about my suspicions since they all thought I was the one who had betrayed the family. I was worried about Lily because she was just a little kid caught in the middle of all this adult drama and she didn't understand why her mom had left her or why her aunt wasn't allowed to visit anymore. I finished my final semester and graduated with my nursing degree. I got a job at a hospital about 3 hours away from my hometown so I could start fresh somewhere that nobody knew about my family situation. I sent graduation announcements to my parents' address hoping they would be proud of me for finishing school despite everything that had happened, but I never heard back from them. I've been working as a nurse for 8 months now and I've built a decent life for myself. I have my own apartment and I've made some good friends at work who don't know anything about the family drama. I still think about Lily all the time and wonder how she's doing, but I don't know how to reach out to her without causing more problems for our parents who are probably already struggling to take care of her. I know Emma fabricated those bank statements somehow because I never took any money from our parents, but I don't know how to prove it and I'm not sure it would matter at this point since so much time has passed. Our parents believed her over me and chose to disown me rather than investigate further, and now she's disappeared and left them to deal with the consequences of her lies. I'm trying to move on with my life, but it's hard to accept that my entire family turned against me based on fake evidence and then the person who created that evidence just vanished when things got complicated. I lost my family, my home, and my financial security in one day because Emma decided to frame me for something I didn't do, and I still don't understand why she would do something so cruel and destructive. People tell me I should be grateful that I'm independent now and I don't have to deal with family drama anymore, but they don't understand that I loved my parents and I miss Lily and I never wanted any of this to happen. I just wanted to finish school and start my career and maybe help take care of our parents when they got older, but instead I'm completely cut off from everyone I grew up with and I don't know if I'll ever see them again. Update 1. Sister's friend exposed her lies with screenshot evidence proving she photoshopped fake bank statements to frame me. My parents saw the proof but still won't give me a real apology, only saying they made a mistake and expect me to forgive them. I thought I would never post about this situation again because I had accepted that my family was gone and I needed to focus on building my new life, but something major happened 3 weeks ago that changed everything and I need to share this because I'm still processing how to handle it. I've been working as a nurse for over 2 years now and I love my job. I moved to a different city and built a completely new social circle and romantic life. I even started dating someone serious about 6 months ago named Jake who knows bits and pieces about my family situation but not all the details. I had gotten to the point where I could go whole weeks without thinking about Emma or my parents or wondering what really happened with those bank statements. Then I got a Facebook message from someone named Jessica who said she used to work with Emma and she had some information I needed to see about what happened to me. I almost deleted the message without reading it because I get random messages sometimes and I try to avoid anything that might drag me back into family drama, but something made me click on it and read what she had to say. Jessica explained that she and Emma had been friends and co-workers at the same IT company until about 8 months ago when Emma quit suddenly and moved to a different state without giving much notice to anyone. Jessica said Emma had always talked about her family situation and mentioned having an adopted sister who was in college, and Jessica remembered Emma complaining about our parents spending too much money on my education when she was struggling financially as a single mom. According to Jessica, Emma had gotten really bitter about the fact that our parents were paying for my school while she was working full-time and raising Lily on her own. She felt like I was getting special treatment just because I was younger and still in school. Emma had apparently made comments about how unfair it was that I got financial support while she had to figure everything out by herself, and she thought our parents loved me more than they loved her. Jessica said she hadn't thought much about these complaints at the time because everyone vents about family stuff at work, but then she saw a local news article online about a nursing student who had been disowned by her adoptive family after being accused of theft, and she recognized my name from Emma's stories. She started putting pieces together and realized the timing matched up with when Emma had been acting strange at work and spending a lot of time on her computer working on personal projects. The message Jessica sent me included screenshots that she had taken of Emma's computer screen about 6 months before I got kicked out, back when they were still working together, and Jessica would sometimes look over Emma's shoulder when she was taking breaks between work tasks. Jessica said she had saved these screenshots at the time because she thought it was weird that Emma was practicing with photo editing software during work hours, but she didn't think much about it until she connected it to my situation. The screenshots show Emma working in Photoshop with what are clearly bank statement templates. She had multiple layers open showing different versions of the same document with various amounts and memo fields being edited and adjusted. You can see her changing the withdrawal amounts and adding notes that mention my name, and there are practice versions where she was experimenting with different dates and totals to make the timeline look realistic. Jessica explained that Emma had gotten really good at photo editing because it was part of her job responsibilities. She worked on marketing materials and web graphics, so she knew how to make digital documents look completely authentic. Jessica said Emma had been bragging about a personal project she was working on, but she never explained what it was for. She just said she was learning new techniques for editing financial documents. Looking at these screenshots made me feel sick because I could see exactly how Emma had created those fake bank statements that destroyed my relationship with our parents. She had spent weeks perfecting them and making sure every detail looked legitimate. The amounts and dates in the screenshots match exactly with what was on the papers she showed our parents, down to the specific memo field entries that mentioned my name. Jessica also included screenshots of text conversations she had with Emma around the time when I got kicked out, where Emma was talking about how she had finally gotten our parents to see the truth about me and how relieved she was that they were cutting off my financial support. Emma had written things like, "Sarah finally got what she deserved and now maybe mom and dad will appreciate everything I do for them instead of throwing money at the golden child." In one of the text conversations, Emma admitted that she had been planning this for months and she was proud of how well her plan had worked. She said she knew our parents would believe documents that looked official and they would never suspect that she had created them herself. Emma wrote that she was tired of watching me get everything handed to me while she had to struggle, and now I would have to learn what it was like to take care of myself without family support. Jessica said she felt terrible about not saying anything sooner, but she hadn't realized the full scope of what Emma had done until she saw the news article about my situation, and by then Emma had already quit her job and disappeared, so Jessica didn't know how to reach anyone in our family to share this information. She had been trying to track me down for months, but it took her a while to find my social media account since I had moved and changed my profile information. I stared at these screenshots for hours trying to process what I was seeing. This was definitive proof that Emma had deliberately framed me and destroyed my relationship with our parents for no reason other than jealousy and spite. I finally had evidence that I had been telling the truth all along, but I also felt angry that this was coming out 2 years too late when I had already rebuilt my entire life around being cut off from my family. I called Jake and showed him everything Jessica had sent me. He was furious on my behalf and said I needed to send this evidence to my parents immediately so they would know what Emma had really done to our family. He pointed out that they were still taking care of Lily and they deserved to know that Emma had manipulated them into cutting off their other daughter based on completely fabricated evidence. I spent a week thinking about whether I wanted to contact my parents with this information because I wasn't sure I was ready to open that door again. I had accepted that they were gone from my life and I didn't know if I wanted them back after they had believed the worst about me so easily. But I also couldn't stop thinking about how they must have been struggling to take care of Lily for 2 years while wondering where Emma had gone and why she had abandoned her daughter. I finally decided to send the screenshots to my Aunt Linda since she was the only family member who had stayed in minimal contact with me over the years. I figured she could decide whether and how to share this information with my parents. I wrote a long email explaining what Jessica had told me and attaching all the evidence, and I asked Linda to handle this however she thought was best since I wasn't ready to deal with direct contact yet. Linda called me the next day and said she had immediately driven over to my parents' house to show them everything. She said they were shocked and devastated when they realized what Emma had done and how completely they had been manipulated. According to Linda, Mom started crying as soon as she saw the screenshots and Dad got really quiet and then started pacing around the house saying he couldn't believe they had been so stupid. Linda said my parents wanted to call me right away to apologize and try to explain what had happened from their perspective, but she told them they needed to think carefully about what they wanted to say because they had caused a lot of damage that couldn't be undone with a simple phone call. She advised them to take some time to process this information and figure out how they could possibly make things right with me. 2 days later I got a call from Mom. She was crying before she even said hello and I could barely understand what she was trying to say through her tears. She kept repeating that she was sorry and they had made a terrible mistake and they never should have believed Emma without investigating further. She said they had been thinking about me every day for 2 years and wondering if they had been too hasty in cutting me off. Mom explained that the bank statements had looked so real and official that it never occurred to them that someone could fake documents like that, especially not Emma, who they trusted completely and who had always been helpful with their computer problems. She said they were elderly and not very tech savvy, so they didn't know it was possible to create fake bank statements that would look authentic enough to fool them. She told me that Emma had been acting like she was doing them a favor by discovering the discrepancies in their account. She had presented herself as the responsible daughter who was protecting them from being taken advantage of by someone they trusted. Mom said Emma had seemed genuinely upset and disappointed about having to expose what I was supposedly doing, so they never suspected that she was the one manipulating them. Mom also explained that they had been overwhelmed and confused about suddenly becoming full-time caregivers for Lily when Emma disappeared. They were dealing with a traumatized 7-year-old who kept asking for her mother while also trying to manage their own grief about losing both their daughters in the same month. She said they had considered reaching out to me for help with Lily, but they thought I hated them for believing Emma's lies. When I asked Mom why it took them 2 years to have any doubts about what happened, she said they had started questioning things about 6 months ago when they realized Emma wasn't coming back and they had time to think more clearly about the situation. Dad had mentioned a few times that it seemed strange for me to steal money and then put my own name in the memo fields, and Mom had been bothered by how quickly Emma had disappeared after getting me kicked out. Mom said they had talked about trying to contact me to at least let me know about my graduation and see if I was doing okay, but they were afraid I would be angry and wouldn't want to hear from them after they had refused to listen to my side of the story. She said they felt ashamed about how they had handled everything and they didn't know how to admit they might have been wrong without concrete proof. I told Mom that I appreciated her calling, but I needed time to think about what this all meant and whether I was ready to have them back in my life. I explained that I had built a new life for myself and I wasn't sure how or if they could fit into it after everything that had happened. She said she understood and they would wait for me to decide what I wanted to do. They just wanted me to know that they loved me and they were sorry for not believing me. 3 days later Dad called me. His conversation was much shorter and more awkward than Mom's, but he said basically the same things about being sorry and making a mistake. What bothered me was that he kept calling it a mistake, like they had accidentally believed the wrong person, instead of acknowledging that they had chosen to kick me out and cut off all contact without doing any real investigation into whether the evidence against me was legitimate. Dad said they were willing to help me financially if I needed anything and they wanted to rebuild our relationship, but he also made comments about how I seemed to be doing fine on my own and maybe this had all worked out for the best since I had learned to be independent. I found this really frustrating because it felt like he was trying to minimize the damage they had caused by suggesting that getting disowned had somehow been good for my character development. Both my parents seem to expect that I should be ready to forgive them and move on now that the truth has come out. They keep asking when I might come visit and whether I want to be involved in Lily's life again. Mom has sent me several texts with pictures of Lily and updates about how she's doing in school, and she keeps mentioning how much Lily misses her Aunt Sarah and asks about me. I feel conflicted because I'm glad to finally have proof that I was telling the truth, but I'm also angry that my parents were so quick to believe the worst about me and so slow to consider that they might have been wrong. They destroyed my sense of security and belonging over fake documents, and now they want everything to go back to normal just because they've seen evidence that Emma manipulated them. I've been in therapy for the past year working on issues related to my family situation, and my therapist has been helping me process these new developments and figure out what kind of relationship I might want with my parents going forward. She's pointed out that their apologies focus more on being deceived by Emma than on the specific ways they hurt me, and they haven't really acknowledged how their actions affected my life beyond saying they made a mistake. Jake thinks I should give them a chance to make things right since they were also victims of Emma's manipulation, but he also supports whatever decision I make about whether to rebuild these relationships. My friends at work are divided. Some think I should be happy to have my family back and others think my parents showed their true colors when they abandoned me so easily. I'm planning to continue therapy and take things very slowly with my parents. I'm not ready to visit or get heavily involved in Lily's care, but I might be open to occasional phone calls and updates about how everyone is doing. I want to see whether they're capable of taking real responsibility for their actions or if they're just going to keep treating this like an unfortunate misunderstanding that everyone should move past quickly. The hardest part is dealing with my feelings about Emma and what she did to our entire family. She destroyed multiple relationships and abandoned her own daughter just because she was jealous about the financial support our parents were giving me for school. I keep thinking about how calculated and cruel her plan was, and how she sat there watching our parents kick me out while knowing she had created all the evidence against me. I also think about Lily, who has been living with our parents for 2 years, wondering why her mother disappeared and why her aunt never visits anymore. She's 9 years old now and she's probably formed her own ideas about what happened to our family. I want to be part of her life again, but I don't know how to explain any of this to a child or whether it would be appropriate to tell her the truth about what her mother did. Update 2. I'm getting married and decided not to invite my parents to my wedding. They're furious, demanding father's rights to walk me down the aisle, and threatening to show up anyway after I explained they haven't earned the right to be there. I've been putting off posting this update because the situation with my parents has gotten really complicated and stressful, but I need advice on how to handle what's been happening, and I think writing it out will help me figure out what to do next. Jake proposed to me 4 months ago and we're getting married next month. We've been planning a small ceremony with about 50 guests, including my friends from work, his family, and a few college friends who have stayed in touch over the years. We decided to keep it intimate and low-key since we're paying for everything ourselves and we wanted it to be about celebrating our relationship rather than having a big expensive party. Over the past 8 months since Emma's lies were exposed, I've had very limited contact with my parents, mostly just occasional phone calls where we make awkward small talk about work and the weather while avoiding any serious discussion about what happened between us. They keep pushing for me to visit and be more involved in Lily's life, but I've maintained that I need to take things slowly and rebuild trust gradually. My therapist has been helping me work through my feelings about whether and how to let my parents back into my life, and I've realized that while I understand they were manipulated by Emma, I'm still really hurt and angry about how quickly they were willing to believe the worst about me and cut me off completely. Their apologies have felt superficial and they seem more focused on moving past this than on understanding how much damage they caused. When Jake and I got engaged, I called my parents to let them know. Mom cried and said she was so happy for me and she hoped this meant I was ready to let them be part of my life again. Dad asked if this meant I was doing well financially since weddings are expensive, and he offered to contribute money to help pay for the ceremony, but I told them we had it covered and we wanted to keep things simple. I spent a lot of time thinking about whether to invite my parents to the wedding. Jake said it was completely my decision and he would support whatever I chose, but his family kept asking whether my parents would be there and making comments about how sad it would be if they missed such an important day. I talked to my therapist about it extensively and we worked through all my conflicting feelings about wanting them there versus not feeling ready to have them at such a meaningful event. I finally decided that I wasn't comfortable having my parents at my wedding because I still don't trust them and I don't feel like they've earned the right to be part of this major milestone in my life. They chose to cut me off during one of the most stressful periods of my life and I don't want to risk them causing drama or making the day about our unresolved family issues instead of about my marriage to Jake. I called my parents 6 weeks ago to tell them about my decision, I explained that while I appreciated their apologies and I was glad the truth had come out about Emma, I still needed more time to heal from what happened and I didn't feel ready to have them at such an important and emotional event. I told them I hoped they could understand that this wasn't about punishing them but about protecting my own emotional well-being on a day that should be joyful and stress-free. Mom immediately started crying and saying she couldn't believe I would exclude them from my wedding after they had apologized and tried to make things right. She said it was cruel to keep them away from such an important family event and she had been looking forward to seeing me get married since I was a little girl. She kept asking what more they could do to prove they were sorry and how long I was going to hold their mistake against them. Dad got really angry and started yelling about how he was my father and he had rights regarding my wedding. He said it was his job to walk me down the aisle and give me away and I couldn't just decide to exclude him from something that important. He said they had raised me and paid for my education and supported me for years, so I owed them the chance to be part of my wedding regardless of what had happened with Emma's lies. I tried to explain that walking me down the aisle is an honor that has to be earned and not just a right that comes with being a parent, and that their actions over the past few years had broken my trust in ways that couldn't be fixed with a simple apology. I told them that I understood they had been manipulated but they had still chosen to believe Emma over me and they had cut me off completely without even considering that there might be another explanation. Dad said I was being ridiculous and overdramatic, that every family goes through difficult times and I needed to grow up and move past this instead of holding grudges forever. He said Emma was the one who had done something wrong and they were victims too, so it wasn't fair for me to punish them for being deceived by someone they trusted. He said if I didn't invite them to the wedding he would never forgive me and we would be done as a family permanently. Mom was still crying and begging me to reconsider. She said she would do anything to make up for what had happened and she just wanted the chance to see her daughter get married. She asked if there was anything they could do or say that would change my mind, and she offered to stay in the background during the ceremony and not try to participate in any of the traditional parent roles if that would make me more comfortable. I told them my decision was final and I needed them to respect it. I explained that this wasn't about revenge or trying to hurt them but about doing what I needed to do to protect my own emotional health during what should be one of the happiest days of my life. I said I hoped they could understand that I still love them but I wasn't ready for them to be part of this celebration. After I hung up, both my parents started calling and texting me constantly trying to change my mind. Mom would send long messages about how much she loved me and how sorry she was, while Dad sent angry texts about how I was destroying our family and being selfish and vindictive. They also started calling Jake directly to try to convince him to talk me into inviting them, which really annoyed me because it felt like they were trying to go around my clearly stated boundaries. Jake handled their calls really well. He told them politely but firmly that this was my decision to make and he was going to support whatever I felt was best for my emotional well-being. He explained that while he understood they wanted to be there, they needed to respect my choice and stop pressuring both of us about it, and he asked them to stop calling him since it was putting him in an uncomfortable position. 2 weeks ago the situation escalated when Dad called me and said they had decided they were going to come to the wedding anyway since I hadn't actually forbidden them from attending. I had just said I wasn't inviting them. He said they knew the date and location from things Mom had seen on social media, and they felt like they had a right to be there even if I didn't want them there because I was still their daughter regardless of our current problems. I was furious and told Dad that if they showed up uninvited I would have them removed by security, that this was my wedding and I had the right to control who was and wasn't welcome at my own event. He said they weren't going to cause any problems and they just wanted to see me get married from the back of the room, but I explained that their mere presence would cause me stress and anxiety that would ruin what should be a happy day. Dad said I was being unreasonable and that no good parent would miss their child's wedding over what he called a temporary disagreement. He said they were going to be there whether I liked it or not because they loved me and they weren't going to let Emma's lies destroy their relationship with me permanently. He said if I had them removed it would just prove that I cared more about holding grudges than about family relationships. I immediately called the venue and explained the situation to the wedding coordinator. She said they deal with family drama all the time and they have procedures for handling uninvited guests who try to crash events. She said they would have security at the door with a guest list and clear instructions not to admit my parents under any circumstances, and if they tried to force their way in or cause a scene outside the building they would call the police. I also talked to Jake about whether we should consider changing the venue or date to make it harder for my parents to find us, but he pointed out that we've already paid deposits and sent invitations and it would be really difficult to coordinate a last-minute change with all our guests. He said we should stick with our original plans and trust that security would be able to handle the situation if my parents actually showed up. My Aunt Linda called me last week to try to mediate. She said my parents had asked her to talk to me about reconsidering my decision because they were devastated about missing my wedding. Linda said she understood my position but she thought I should consider that they were genuinely sorry and they had been through a lot of pain over the past few years too, dealing with Emma's disappearance and raising Lily unexpectedly. I told Linda that I appreciated her concern but this wasn't really about punishment or revenge, it was about the fact that I don't trust my parents not to make my wedding day about our family drama instead of about my marriage to Jake. I explained that I'm still working through my feelings about what happened and I'm not ready to have them at such an important event when I haven't fully healed from the damage they caused. Linda said she thought I was making a mistake that I would regret later, that weddings are once-in-a-lifetime events and family relationships are more important than temporary hurt feelings. She said my parents had learned their lesson about trusting Emma and they would never make that kind of mistake again, so I should give them a chance to show that they had changed and grown from this experience. I'm starting to feel like everyone expects me to just get over what happened because my parents were technically victims of Emma's manipulation too, but nobody seems to understand that their response to that manipulation revealed something important about how they really felt about me and how easily they were willing to believe I would betray them. The fake bank statements were convincing, but they never even asked me for my side of the story or considered that there might be an explanation. Jake's family has been trying to stay out of it, but I can tell they think it's weird that my parents won't be at the wedding. His mom keeps asking if there's anything she can do to help resolve the situation, and his dad made a comment about how family is family and sometimes you have to forgive and move on. I appreciate that they're trying to be supportive, but it makes me feel like maybe I'm being too harsh or holding grudges for too long. My therapist says I'm making the right decision for my current emotional state and I shouldn't let other people pressure me into doing something that doesn't feel right just because it would make them more comfortable. She pointed out that my parents are still trying to control the situation and override my boundaries by threatening to show up anyway, which shows they haven't really learned to respect my autonomy and decision-making. I'm worried about what will happen if my parents actually do show up at the wedding. I don't want my special day to turn into a dramatic confrontation, but I also can't let them think they can just ignore my clearly stated wishes and force their way back into my life. I've worked really hard to build a new sense of security and independence, and I don't want to let them undermine that progress by giving in to their demands and threats. The wedding is in 3 weeks and I'm trying to focus on the positive aspects of marrying Jake and celebrating with the people who have consistently supported me over the past few years, but this situation with my parents is creating a lot of stress and anxiety that I shouldn't have to deal with during what should be a happy time. I just want one day that's about my relationship with Jake without having to navigate complicated family dynamics and unresolved trauma. Update 3. My parents and sister crashed my wedding despite being explicitly uninvited, caused a scene during the ceremony, then tried to terminate my visitation rights with my niece through lawyers. Here's how we handled it and where things stand now. I never wanted to post another update about this situation because I was hoping that getting married would finally close this chapter of my life and let me move forward without dealing with more family drama. But what happened at my wedding and the aftermath has been so crazy that I need to document it and get some perspective on how to handle what's been happening since then. The wedding was supposed to be a small, peaceful ceremony with just our closest friends and Jake's family. We had hired security like I mentioned in my last update, and I thought we had covered all our bases to prevent my parents from disrupting the day. The venue coordinator had assured me that they had experience handling uninvited family members and they would make sure nobody got in who wasn't on our guest list. 3 days before the wedding I got a call from my Aunt Linda saying that my parents had been asking her for details about the ceremony, specifically what time it was starting and whether there would be a reception afterward. She said they were still insisting they were going to attend despite my explicit instructions that they weren't welcome, and she was calling to warn me that they seemed really determined to find a way to be there. Linda also mentioned that Emma had contacted her 2 weeks earlier asking about my wedding. Apparently Emma had heard through some mutual acquaintances that I was getting married and she wanted to know if the family was going to be there. Linda said she had told Emma that the situation was complicated because of everything that had happened, but she didn't give her any specific details about the date or location of the ceremony. I was really disturbed to hear that Emma was suddenly interested in family events after disappearing for over 2 years, especially since she was the one who had created this whole mess in the first place by framing me and abandoning Lily. I told Linda not to share any information about my wedding with anyone, including Emma, because I didn't want to deal with more unexpected visitors showing up to cause problems. The morning of the wedding I was getting ready at the venue with my bridesmaids when the coordinator came to tell me that there were some people outside claiming to be my family and demanding to be let in for the ceremony. She said she had checked the guest list and their names weren't on it, so security was keeping them outside, but they were getting increasingly aggressive and threatening to call the police if they weren't admitted. I looked out the window and saw my parents standing by the entrance with Emma, who looked completely different from how I remembered her. She had cut her hair really short and lost a lot of weight and she was wearing a dress that looked expensive. They were talking to the security guard and pointing at the building. Mom was crying and Dad looked really angry, and Emma was holding what looked like some kind of official document. My heart started racing because I couldn't believe Emma had actually shown up after everything she had done, and I was furious that my parents had brought her with them after she had destroyed our family and abandoned Lily for 2 years. I told the coordinator to call the police immediately and have them all removed from the property because none of them were welcome and I had specifically told my parents not to come. The coordinator said security was already handling the situation and she would make sure they didn't get inside the building, but she warned me that they might try to cause a scene outside during the ceremony since the windows were open and we would be able to hear if they started yelling. She asked if I wanted to delay the start time or move to a different room, but I said I wasn't going to let them ruin my wedding by changing our plans. Jake came to find me before the ceremony was supposed to start and said the police had arrived and were talking to my parents and Emma outside, but they weren't arresting anyone because technically they weren't trespassing since they were on a public sidewalk. He said the officers had told them they needed to leave the area, but they were arguing that they had a right to be there because it was a family event. I was getting really upset and stressed about the whole situation. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and instead I was dealing with family drama and police involvement before the ceremony had even started. My bridesmaids were trying to calm me down and fix my makeup, but I could hear voices outside getting louder, and I was worried that our guests inside were starting to notice the commotion. We decided to start the ceremony as planned and hoped that my parents and Emma would eventually give up and leave, but about halfway through the officiant's opening remarks I heard Dad's voice yelling my name from outside the window. He was shouting that he was my father and he had a right to be there, and that I was making a huge mistake by excluding my family from such an important day. Several of our guests turned to look toward the windows and Jake squeezed my hand to try to keep me focused on the ceremony, but then Emma's voice joined in and she started yelling that she had something important to tell everyone about what really happened between us. She said she had come back to set the record straight and make sure I knew the truth about our family situation. The officiant paused and asked if I wanted to continue or take a break to deal with the disruption, but I told him to keep going because I wasn't going to let them ruin this moment for me and Jake. I was determined to get married regardless of what was happening outside, but it was really hard to focus on the ceremony with all the shouting and commotion going on just a few feet away. Emma kept yelling things about how she had been protecting Lily from our parents and how I didn't understand the real situation with our family. She said she had evidence that would prove she had been trying to help me all along. Mom was crying loudly and begging me to come outside and talk to them, while Dad continued shouting about his rights as my father and how I was being manipulated by Jake into cutting off my family. Some of Jake's relatives started looking really uncomfortable and whispering to each other about what was happening, and I could tell that several of our friends were getting upset on our behalf about the disruption. The whole ceremony felt tense and chaotic instead of joyful and celebratory, and I was struggling not to cry from frustration and anger about having my wedding day ruined. Right as the officiant was asking us to exchange vows, the shouting outside suddenly got much louder and more intense, and we could hear what sounded like a physical altercation happening. One of the security guards came inside and whispered something to the coordinator, who then came over to tell us that Emma had tried to force her way past security and the police were now arresting her for disorderly conduct. The coordinator said my parents were also being asked to leave the area or face arrest, and she thought the situation would calm down within a few minutes so we could finish the ceremony in peace. But I was already so shaken and upset by everything that had happened that I could barely focus on Jake's vows, and I kept waiting for the next interruption or dramatic outburst from outside. We managed to finish the ceremony and exchange rings, but the whole thing felt surreal and stressful instead of romantic and meaningful like we had planned. During the reception, several guests came up to ask if we were okay and whether there was anything they could do to help, which was nice but also embarrassing because it meant everyone was focused on the family drama instead of celebrating our marriage. Jake's parents were really upset about what had happened and kept apologizing as if it was somehow their fault. They said they couldn't believe anyone would disrupt someone's wedding like that and they were sorry we had to deal with such stress on what should have been a perfect day. I appreciated their support, but I also felt terrible that their first impression of my family was seeing them get arrested outside our wedding venue. 2 days after the wedding I got a call from a lawyer representing my parents and Emma. He said they were filing for visitation rights with Lily and they wanted to establish a legal custody arrangement that would give me regular access to see her. I was completely confused because I hadn't asked for visitation rights and I didn't understand why they thought they needed lawyers to arrange for me to see Lily. The lawyer explained that Emma was back and living with my parents again, and they were concerned that I might try to interfere with their custody of Lily or turn her against them by telling her about what had happened with the fake bank statements. He said they wanted to establish clear legal boundaries around my relationship with Lily to protect everyone involved and make sure there wouldn't be any future conflicts. I told the lawyer that I had never threatened to interfere with their custody and I hadn't even seen Lily in over 2 years, so I didn't understand why they thought legal intervention was necessary. He said Emma had told them I was planning to sue for custody or try to have Lily removed from their home because I blamed them for damaging my relationship with her mother. This was completely false and I had never said anything about wanting custody of Lily. I had been respecting their space and focusing on my own life exactly like they had demanded when they kicked me out. I told the lawyer that if they wanted to arrange visits with Lily they could call me directly instead of involving legal professionals, but he said Emma insisted that everything needed to be documented and formalized to prevent future problems. I was really angry that Emma was back and apparently trying to control the situation again after abandoning Lily for 2 years, and I was frustrated that my parents were still listening to her and treating her like a reliable source of information about my intentions. It seemed like they hadn't learned anything from the bank statement situation about Emma's tendency to manipulate and create drama. Jake and I decided to hire our own lawyer to respond to their legal filing and protect ourselves from whatever Emma was planning. Our attorney said it was unusual for people to preemptively file for protection from custody disputes that hadn't actually been threatened. She said it looked like they were either trying to establish legal grounds to prevent me from seeing Lily, or they were setting up some kind of case that would make me look unstable or vindictive. Our lawyer advised us to document everything that had happened at the wedding and get statements from witnesses who had seen my parents and Emma disrupting the ceremony. She said their behavior demonstrated a pattern of disrespecting boundaries and trying to control situations through dramatic confrontations rather than reasonable communication. I also started getting text messages from Emma trying to explain why she had come back and what she was hoping to accomplish. She said she had spent 2 years thinking about what happened and she realized she had made mistakes that hurt everyone in the family. She claimed she wanted to make things right and rebuild relationships, but she thought legal structure was necessary because everyone had too much hurt and anger to communicate effectively on their own. Emma's messages were really manipulative and confusing. She would say things like she was sorry for the pain she had caused but then claim that her actions had been misunderstood and she had actually been trying to protect Lily from our parents' financial irresponsibility. She said the fake bank statements were wrong but she had been genuinely concerned about how much money our parents were spending on my education while struggling to help her with Lily's expenses. I didn't respond to any of Emma's messages because I could see that she was still trying to manipulate the situation and control the narrative about what had happened. She wasn't taking real responsibility for deliberately framing me and destroying my relationship with our parents. Instead, she was trying to rewrite history and make it seem like her actions had been motivated by legitimate concerns rather than jealousy and spite. The legal situation dragged on for 6 weeks with lawyers sending letters back and forth about visitation schedules and custody arrangements that I had never requested. It was expensive and stressful and it felt like Emma was using the legal system to harass me and Jake during what should have been our honeymoon period as newlyweds. Finally, our lawyer suggested that we request a mediation session where all parties could meet with a neutral third party to discuss what everyone actually wanted and whether legal intervention was really necessary. She said this would give us a chance to clarify that I wasn't seeking custody and find out what Emma and my parents were really trying to accomplish with their legal filing. The mediation session was scheduled for 3 weeks ago and it was one of the most frustrating and surreal experiences of my life. Emma spent most of the time crying and talking about how much she had missed everyone and how sorry she was for disappearing. She said she had been dealing with mental health issues and financial problems that had made her feel desperate and isolated, and she had made bad decisions that she regretted. Emma claimed that she had left Lily with our parents because she knew they would take good care of her while she got her life together, and she had only stayed away so long because she was ashamed of what she had done and afraid that coming back would make things worse for everyone. She said she had been working with a therapist and getting treatment for depression and anxiety, and she was finally ready to take responsibility for her mistakes. But when the mediator asked Emma to specifically address the fake bank statements and the impact they had on my relationship with our parents, she started deflecting and saying that the real issue was communication problems within our family that had been building up for years. She said everyone had contributed to the dysfunction and she wasn't the only one who had made mistakes during that difficult time. My parents sat there nodding along with everything Emma said and backing up her version of events. They talked about how hard it had been to suddenly become full-time caregivers for Lily and how grateful they were that Emma was back to help with parenting responsibilities. They said they wanted to focus on moving forward as a family rather than dwelling on past conflicts that couldn't be changed. I was furious that they were still enabling Emma and treating her like a victim of circumstances rather than someone who had deliberately and systematically destroyed multiple relationships through calculated lies and manipulation. The mediator kept trying to get them to acknowledge the specific harm that had been caused by the fake bank statements, but they kept changing the subject and talking about forgiveness and healing. When it was my turn to speak, I explained that I had never asked for custody of Lily and I wasn't planning to interfere with their family arrangement, but I also wasn't interested in rebuilding relationships with people who had shown they couldn't be trusted and who were still defending Emma's actions. I said they had filed legal papers based on false assumptions about my intentions, and I wanted them to drop the case and leave me alone. The mediator asked if there was any possibility of establishing a limited visitation arrangement that would allow me to maintain a relationship with Lily without requiring me to interact extensively with Emma or my parents, but I said I wasn't ready for that kind of involvement and I needed them to respect my boundaries about staying out of my life. Emma started crying harder and saying that she just wanted her family back together and she couldn't stand the thought of Lily growing up without knowing her aunt. She said she had already lost 2 years with her daughter and she didn't want to lose any more family connections because of mistakes she had made in the past. I told Emma that she had created the situation by choosing to frame me and abandon Lily, and she didn't get to come back after 2 years and demand that everyone pretend nothing had happened. I said if she really cared about Lily's well-being she would focus on being a stable mother instead of trying to manipulate everyone else into participating in her fantasy of a happy reunited family. The mediation ended with an agreement that my parents and Emma would drop their legal filing and stop contacting me about visitation arrangements, while I agreed not to pursue any custody claims or interfere with their living situation. It was basically an agreement for everyone to leave each other alone, which was exactly what I had wanted from the beginning. Since then I've only heard from them once when my Aunt Linda called to tell me that Emma had moved back out of my parents' house after a few weeks and was living on her own again, but she was still involved in Lily's daily care and picking her up from school regularly. Linda said the situation seemed stable but she was worried about how confusing it must be for Lily to have her mother coming and going unpredictably. I feel bad for Lily because she's now 10 years old and she's spent the past 2.5 years watching adults make dramatic and inconsistent decisions about family relationships without anyone considering how it affects her sense of security. She's probably confused about why her aunt disappeared and why her mother keeps leaving and coming back, and she's old enough now to understand that there are serious problems between the adults in her life. Jake and I have been focusing on building our marriage and our new life together. We bought a house last month and we're talking about starting our own family in the next few years. I've been in therapy working on processing all the trauma and betrayal I've experienced, and I'm trying to accept that my parents and Emma may never be capable of the kind of honest relationship that I would need to feel safe being around them. I still love Lily and I miss having a relationship with her, but I don't think it's healthy for me to expose myself to Emma's manipulation and my parents' enabling just to maintain that connection. I hope that someday when Lily is older she'll be able to understand what really happened and make her own decisions about whether she wants me in her life, but for now I need to protect my own well-being and focus on the family I'm building with Jake.